All right, and welcome back to the weekly Refold Roundtable podcast, where we talk about what you want us to talk about. So, for this week, we're going to be talking about domains. What are they? What are the benefits of focusing on them? Who invented them? All about domains, a domain deep dive. So, today we have Bree and we have Shiki.
Hello. I'm excited for this one. I think this is going
Me
to be a
too.
really fun conversation.
Yep, I wanna know more myself.
You want to know more yourself? What do you want to know about domains?
Where they came from.
Okay, now that's actually an interesting one. Where domains came from. So, domains are not a new concept. In SLA, it's often called narrow input. So if you look at like Crashin, actually Crashin, all of his stuff is free on his website, sdcrashin.com, I think. You should definitely check it out. Narrow input is not a new concept. It's been around, I think, at least since the 80s. We chose to call it domains to make them a little bit more accessible. But the idea of focusing on a small slice of input is not new, and it's not unique to Refold.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not new to Refold, but I do think in the immersion community, it's something relatively new that has been like re-unearthed, if that makes any sense. Like it's been a concept that's existed for a while, but I don't think it's something that is honestly widely talked about outside of Refold. Do you see it talked about a lot of places outside of Refold or no? I'm trying to think.
I've never heard the term until I came across Refold.
Mm,
It's
interesting.
sort of like sometimes there are trends in language learning. For
Yeah.
example, Japanese, the spoken language, which is a very popular textbook series for Japanese in like the 80s, did in fact cover pitch accent. And then it fell to the wayside for like 40 years. And then sort of like Matt Dogan, these sort of popular YouTubers brought it back in fashion. So I think with domains, again, it might just be a trend where like we're rediscovering something, right? Fashion comes in and out, language learning comes in and out of style. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. And I don't think I really ever gave domains much thought. Like when I first started immersing, when y'all first started immersing, were domains something that y'all had on your mind or no?
Not for me. When I first started, it was just kind of whatever. I was just watching whatever would interest me and not make me get bored and want to quit. And I've only, focused on domains recently, becoming 2C. I've chosen slice of life to focus on for 2C.
Classic choice.
I'm going to go ahead and say no. Domains were not originally on my mind. I think I found them organically because I realized, oh, I understand this. It's enjoyable. And I understand other things that are in that same sort of genre. And yeah, I think it was an organic thing for me, but definitely not something before joining Refold that I was acutely aware of.
Interesting. Yeah, I think like in the beginning, I was aware that domains existed. And I think I can't really remember. I feel like the beginning of my language learning journey with Spanish is such a haze because I haven't documented anything, which was a regret we talked about in the last episode. But I think in the beginning I didn't do anything with domains because I thought to myself, well, the first 1000 years or the most common vocabulary is going to be used anywhere you go basically. But I do think that I tried to find some things that were somewhat grounded in real life.
I think that's true of anything where like the core 1 or 2,000 words is
Hmm.
cross domain. But to me, that's not the hard part. The hard part is everything after that.
Exactly. It is. So when I first started, I'm one of those people, I don't know about y'all, but I cannot pay attention to something if it doesn't fall into one of my interests. And I have very specific likes and I have very specific interests. And if something's going to be compelling, I have a hard time going, okay, I'm going to focus on slice of life because that is what is useful. I have a really hard time doing that. But what I did do was I tried to find things that were kind of like slice of life adjacent, where instead of just like high fantasy or epic fantasy, it was like urban fantasy. So it was based in, had fantasy elements like dragons and stuff, but it was based in, present time with cell phones and there would be at least some useful vocabulary.
I totally
Yeah, I
feel
had that
you.
same. Oh, go ahead, Shiki.
Like when it comes to stuff to watch, like I can't focus on something unless I have an interest. But at the same time, I am also motivated by efficiency. And slice of life is an efficient way to get to stage 3, level
Mhm.
5 comprehension. So I am motivated by that and I'm willing to do it.
Interesting. Yeah, I wish I was motivated, but I want to say like I love the idea of efficiency. I wish I was motivated by efficiency, but I kind of have to find like shortcuts and stuff. What were you gonna say, Gorg? What were your thoughts?
I was gonna say, yeah, interestingly enough, I also came to the conclusion that a lot of things that we don't consider slice of life can be slice of life. Urban horror that takes place in like a house or a city.
Hmm.
Sure, there might be some things that are not in most slice of life shows or series, but the vocab is not that far gone, right? There's not a whole lot of niche domain specific vocab in urban fantasy, modern horror. Um, so I kind of stumbled upon that myself, I think.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. And I like when you hit on the point that things that you don't think of as being slice of life can actually fall into that. Um, what other things have you found to be just as effective as slice of life? So if you can't focus on slice of life, what are some things that y'all like to do to listen to?
Definitely for me, it's horror. I've found that most horror novels I read are essentially slice of life with either some sort of terror, some sort of dread, maybe a serial killer, maybe a ghost. But in general, I feel like the vocab has always been like what I would expect from day to day life, just with
Yeah.
an added element of scariness.
Yeah. I can't usually I can't do horror, but I totally agree with that. There's an audio play that I'm listening to right now that is The Sandman, and it's like a DC comic um that is like an audio drama where everything is acted out and it's really awesome. But it's set in like a real world adjacent where there's vocabulary that makes a lot of sense, but there's also like, mythology and things like that makes it really interesting. Another thing that I really like that is slice of life adjacent are travel channels. So it's not necessarily slice of life, but it's people interacting with other people. And I think a lot of the time, not me, I'm not really a traveler, but a lot of people are motivated by travel for language learning, right? And I think that watching travel channels is a great way to get some vocabulary that would be travel relevant, you know?
I'm not actually sold on travel vlogs as good immersion content. I
We're
feel
gonna
like
fight. Let's fight.
they're not super language dense, and
Which ones are
I'm
you
not sure
watching?
how much actual, like, useful vocab there is in
What?
a travel log.
What? What?
Yeah, I have
What?
always felt that way. I have always
Okay.
felt that way.
I disagree. Well, okay, let me think. I'm trying to think. A lot of the ones that I watch, there's a lot of talking, and they're talking about what they're doing. And I think in the beginning for me, when I had like no grasp of what was going on in Spanish and nothing was comprehensible, aside from like, kids shows or graded readers and things like that, I really gravitated to travel channels because they would be walking through, they would be saying greetings to people, and they would be talking about what they're doing, which I thought was interesting because even though I couldn't necessarily understand what they were saying, I was able to understand what was happening. Like they're traveling, they're talking about this thing that they're holding, they're eating something, they're looking at something, they're talking about something. So I think that for me personally, travel channels really they were what I predominantly listened to in the beginning.
I do think what you said is valid that travel channels, travel vlogs are great for comprehensible input because it's like they're walking through some market or something
Thank
and
you.
describing what they're doing, and I think it definitely sounds like it'd be super useful in the beginning stages like that.
Yeah, that's really a lot of fun. I guess maybe just because it's one of my interests where I don't like to travel, but I love to vicariously live through other people. Like travel vlogs specifically. Okay, don't listen, I'm a huge nerd, okay, but I think we all are here who are listening live and who will be listening to the recording. Huge nerds. And a lot of the travel vlogs that I watched were like Spanish people that spoke Spanish living and or traveling in Japan. So
They're J-vloggers in Spanish, y'all.
I
That's
love
essentially
it.
what it is.
Yeah,
Think,
they're so good.
Tokyo Sam and the people who live in Japan, their whole
I'm
spiel
addicted. I'm
is that they live in
addicted.
Japan.
I don't wanna live
They're
in Japan.
J-vloggers in Spanish.
I wanna watch people
That is
that's my
essentially what it
domain.
is.
I wanna watch people living in Japan. I don't wanna do it myself. I wanna watch other people doing it in Spanish or English, but, you know.
Believe it or not, for some reason, I actually have in my Spanish YouTube recommendations, a channel called Mexicanos in Tokyo, I think is the name of the
Can you send
channel,
that to me in my
and
DMs? 'Cause that
I
sounds
can
really
send it to
interesting.
you for sure. I don't actually enjoy that content though, so I don't know why they keep popping up in my recommendations.
Oh, really? YouTube is really trying to send you a message.
Watch more J-vloggers.
Yeah, watch more J-vloggers. Get on the J-vlog train. Oh,
So
man.
it sounds like maybe in your case, Bree,
Mhm.
what your domains are in your target language are similar to what you would read or listen to in English.
Yes. 100%.
How about you, Vanessa? Is that similar?
Uh, yes and no, because the things that I would be interested in are, like, horror and true crime, where it's, like, the YouTubers who basically talk about this case, and it's just somebody talking to a camera, and it's not very comprehensible. So, that's, like, something I want to conquer when I'm better, is, like, true crime stuff in Japanese, if I can find it in the first place, it's kind of hard to find.
I'm sure you will be able to find it. I love true crime in Spanish. I love true crime too. We can talk offline about our love of true crime. But a lot of what I listen to aside from travel is I kind of graduated from travel to true crime. It's kind of funny that you mentioned that because that's kind of my progression is it took a while because true crime, there's not a lot of like visual stuff usually because it's so gnarly and it's usually talking about past events and things like that. It is a lot of fun to listen to. I don't know if it's really useful domain though, true crime.
Yeah, my like for slice of life stuff is in Japanese is fueled by efficiency.
Yeah.
And then I have to, like, go from there.
Yeah. So in my case, I definitely do not consume nearly as much romance in English as I do in my target languages. And I think it's a little bit of romance is one of those sort of everyday normal language, slice of life adjacent sort of domains. Um, and for me, I'm very much team comprehension equals enjoyability. So I don't think I've ever read a romance book in English, but I've read so many in Filipino. I've read a lot in Spanish. And I started one in Dutch yesterday on a whim, and I got like 4,000 words into it. I was like, yeah, this is definitely a solid domain for me, but I would never read it in English.
It's such
I
a
think it's just,
useful domain though. Like
it's incredibly useful. It's very
romance
slice
is
of life.
so
It's
useful.
compelling. I think they underrate it, I think.
Yeah. I wish I liked romance. I just can't get into it. I try. I just can't, but I would love what's nice about romance is that you learn how to talk about things like your feelings, interpersonal relationships. If you're a single person that is learning a language, it's good for learning how to talk to other people maybe that you meet. I think it's a really useful domain to focus in, honestly. I did watch one romance, but you don't like it. The Sylvanas and Lana. Um
Is that a romance? To me, that was more of like a sitcom.
It's so okay, well, to me, it was all of it is romance. It's like this person likes this person, there's romantic drama. This person wants to get with this person and there's drama. There's all these people trying to sabotage each other's relationships and love triangles and things like that. Um I liked it because of the family aspect maybe, because on top of the romance, there was a lot of familial relationships, there was school vocab. A lot of the vocab was super useful, super useful.
I couldn't get into it. It
That's okay.
lacked to me what I enjoy about Spanish media. It was a telenovela that tried to be a sitcom, but also wasn't at the same time, and it just wasn't for me.
It's okay. You're that is valid, and you don't have to. I loved it personally. And what's funny is it's not that wasn't like my usual uh type of show that I liked. There was just something about it that I latched onto. Maybe like the ridiculousness of the characters and the heartwarming family moments. I was a sucker for those. And the music was a real bop. We're getting kind of off track though. But
Yeah,
yeah,
let's
I
not
thought
go
it was
down
a
a
good show.
tangent about
Yeah.
Sylvanas and Lana.
I could talk about it for weeks, but yeah, no more Sylvanas and Lana tangent.
So, I know that Vanessa touched on this. She's focusing on slice of life, not because she likes it, but because of the
Mhm.
efficiency. So, how does like your domain affect your goal or your goal affect your domain? Like if I were like wanting to output, I would focus on slice of life. But I can totally see like I'm not living in a country, I don't know any speakers. I just want to focus on content I enjoy. So what's your take on that, Bree?
I I
Does your domain affect your goal or does your goal affect your domain?
okay, so I'm gonna give like the do as I say, not as I do answer. So I think that your goals should affect what domains you are listening to. So like you said, if you want to speak faster and if you want to progress to like on the Refold roadmap, if you want to get to stage 3 and stage 4 faster, then definitely focus on predominantly slice of life adjacent things that are based at the very least in the real world, like crime drama or horror based in the real world or slice of life romance comedies, high school stuff, whatever. I think that would be most useful. But for me personally, I have to, I have, I talk about this all the time. I have ADHD. It's something that, I don't mind, but I have to follow my interests or else I just literally cannot pay attention. So for me, I just go for what do I like? And is there something in that, like, spectrum of things that I like that has useful vocabulary, okay, try to go for that. So if I read fantasy, try to read urban fantasy. Make those compromises, but I don't do it all the time. I just read a 2000 page book that had nothing to do with anything in the modern world, but it was highly compelling and I went with it and it was fine. But yeah, I think you should definitely go for things that are um slice of life if your goal is speaking.
I do want to say that in the beginning, I did not enjoy slice of life at all because when your comprehension is low, it's like nothing is happening and it's difficult to enjoy. But now that I have like level 4 comprehension of most things, slice of life is a lot easier to enjoy and I have learned to like it because my
How?
comprehension is higher.
How did you That's a really good you brought up a good point. So you taught yourself how to like it. Teach me how. What did you do to make yourself like it more? Was there like an active process of trying to do it or was it just that you watched it so much that you got used to it and you found it endearing? Like what did you have a strategy to make the content more enjoyable and more comprehensible?
I think it's just a natural consequence of your comprehension being higher, but
Mhm.
also you do have to find a series that is good by whatever standards you have. That would mean good. And you have to get invested into the characters. I think that's a major part of it because a major part of the plot of Slice of Life is the conversations between people and their interactions and what's going on in their life, basically.
I do like slice of life when it comes to anime. So it's not that I don't like slice of life. I think it's more difficult for me to find slice of life that I like in my target language or things like that. Because like Gorg likes like romance and whatnot. And a lot of Spanish media is really heavily dominated by, the romance genre.
And it might be a degree of Stockholm syndrome. I definitely did not read romance before,
Yes.
like, going hard on Filipino, which has a market dominated by cheesy love stories. And I think after you read half a dozen novels or watch half a dozen, teleserie, you end up really, like, liking it. It's sort of like when a song that you don't like the first time it comes on the radio comes on, and then after hearing it the 30th time that week, you're like, "Hey, this is actually a bop." So, I don't
Yes.
know. Stockholm syndrome for, domains.
Okay, maybe I just need to do that. Like lock myself in a room with telenovelas and just like keep my eyes open with toothpicks and force myself to watch them 24 hours on end and see
They're
if at
actually
the at
really
the at the
good.
end
I enjoy them. I
I
enjoy
get
them.
so
They
stressed.
always
I
have, like,
try.
really gorgeous people, like, with this sort of, like, rich to see, or they're I don't watch the gritty ones, like, I don't wanna watch some girl's descent into, like, prostitution and drugs or something. I
Yeah,
avoid
I
those. But,
can't
like,
do
the
that.
escapism fantasy, like, I'm a maid, but then, like, I made the boss of the ranch fall in love with me, and,
I
like,
can't
that
do
sort of
that.
stuff is, like, nice little bit of escapism.
Yeah. I don't know. I'll try it. Send me some of your favorites and I'll see what I can do.
Well, they're gonna be in Japanese for me.
Oh, that's true. Well, for a lot of animes and I can find in Spanish because
Mhm.
there's a lot of the Spanish dubs. Like as a side note, are popping. Specifically, not from Spain, unfortunately. Sorry for anybody learning Spain Spanish that really enjoys Spain anime dubs. But
Lo
Latin
siento.
American dubs are incredible. They are so good. They're better than English dubs. And I've actually seen some YouTubers on like Spanish anime tube because that's where I live because I'm a big nerd. Actually have made arguments that some of the Spanish dubs they think are better than the original. Don't fight me on this. I'm a lover, not a fighter. I don't want to fight on this.
People have those spicy hot takes about their favorite dubs. I had
They
someone from the Refold
do.
community tell me, they're like, "Hey, Avatar is best in Hebrew," and I'm like, "Oh." I had
That is
someone
very
last
specific.
week tell me
Wow.
about, yeah, Avatar is best in Hebrew. I had someone say that some of the Ghibli movies are better in Cantonese than Japanese. So, I mean, it's a
Okay.
hot take, but it seems like they're fairly common hot takes.
Okay. 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 I'm gonna learn Hebrew just to watch Avatar. I love that series. So if it's better than
Maybe
in
that could be
Hebrew.
a future topic about dubs.
Oh, yeah,
So,
someone suggests that.
speaking
Someone
of
should.
topics, I do have a question I've been wanting to ask.
Oh.
Do we consider learner content like comprehensible input channels, dreaming Spanish, are they is that its own domain? Can learner
Ooh.
content be its own domain, like graded readers, Ollie Richards? I think it can be. I came to that conclusion when I was trying to categorize channels. I was like, I can't categorize this beyond learner content.
Yeah, I agree with that. It can be its own thing.
I think that's a really good question. I don't know.
'Cause
It's
it's
a
like
lot
Sometimes
of
they're
it.
really good.
They
Like,
are.
they're you can enjoy them even if you're advanced, I feel like. Like,
Mhm.
I thought Hola
Espanol
Lola was hilarious,
that's by the guys
right?
whose channel is Espanol con Juan, and he is hilarious. He
I find him
teaches
really
grammar concepts.
annoying. He
I love
repeats
him.
himself too much.
I know, but when you're a beginner, you need that. Like if you have no idea what's going on, that repetitiveness, is that a word? I don't know. We're going with it though. But the way that he talks and the scenarios that he comes up with are just so ridiculous and so funny. Um, but I would say that the content is real life, right? So they're talking about things that you would use in daily life. But as its own genre, I don't know. I would love to see people in the
Not
comments
its
tell
own
us what they think
its
about
own
that.
domain.
Like, do you think that beginner content in the comments, let us know. Do you think that beginner content is its own domain? And what do you think that it is if it's not? That's a really good question. I have no idea.
Yeah, some are
I'm
just
gonna
legitimately funny. Hola Lola will always have a special place in my heart
It's so
because
good.
the idea of a chubby British expat moving to Spain, trying to date, like, it was really good because that's actually a thing that happens in Spanish culture.
The
Like, there
sequel
really
was good
are
too.
hordes of British expat men trying to date and live in Spain, and I felt like it was culturally appropriate, like, it touched on some real life stuff, and, it was easy to read, and yeah, I feel like learner-oriented content can be its own domain.
Yeah. And I don't think that it's something that you necessarily need to avoid. I think there are some people who might be purists. I'm not using that in a bad way, but immersion purists that wouldn't necessarily recommend listening to any content made for beginners. But I will say in the beginning, for me, because I did listen to Español con Juan and Dreaming Spanish a lot in the beginning. And I found those channels incredibly helpful because even though they were speaking slowly and extraordinarily clearly and enunciating everything, it was still real Spanish. They were using it in ways that Spanish people would use Spanish, native construction, simplified, absolutely, but still native construction. And it was highly comprehensible. And it's a great way to kind of plant the seed of understanding. I do think that there is a danger though on relying on that too much in the beginning, in that you you get it's kind of like a crutch, But I think if you use it like a tool alongside, actual content and things like that, I think it's a really good thing to listen to, even if it's not its own domain, whatever it is. I do think that beginner content definitely has a place,
I
especially in the very,
do
very beginning.
I do think there is a difference between strictly comprehensible input and beginner content. Like
Hmm.
something like the famous Stephen Krashen demonstration would be strictly comprehensible input, and then something like a cartoon for kids would be like beginner content, or something that's like simplified, like certain channels that only use certain vocabulary and the conversations are simplified. It's like two different things.
It's really interesting to me being sort of this terminal permanent beginner that, like, in Chinese, beginner content is often based on numbers, like the number of unique characters used, the unique Chinese characters. Whereas in, like, Spanish, beginner content is like, do we use this verb tense? Do we use these sort of like advanced compound constructions or not? And it's interesting to me how they vary depending on the language. And I guess
Yeah.
it's to be expected, but it's not something you would think about unless you've actually like read graded readers in Chinese and also in Spanish. Like "hola lola" is totally in the present tense, right? So you don't have to learn
Yes.
any of the other conjugations.
Yes.
Um, and the Chinese graded readers are the same. They've got some that are like 150 characters only.
What I really enjoyed about Ola Lola too is that it wasn't like, I think when a lot of people think of beginner content, they kind of think of like kids beginner content where it's a lot of stuff about colors
I
and
think it's going to be
numbers.
fairy tales. Yeah.
Not only
Or
that, but just
yeah.
like colors, things that I don't really care about numbers in the beginning. Like this might be a spicy take, but I think that knowing like colors and numbers is pretty much useless in the very beginning. I want to know more stuff that will make things more interesting. And knowing
I
how to
agree.
count and knowing what food names are. Oh my gosh. No way. That's not interesting. What I think it's important to find things if you are going to go the content made for beginners, for learners route, is to find things that actually has useful stuff in it that will give you repetition of the most common words. So for example, if you're going through one of the Refold 1K decks, find something that will give you those words in context, you know. Um and I think if you use it as a tool, as reinforcement for that vocabulary to make the rest of your immersion journey that much more enjoyable, I think it's a good way to like jumpstart it. But I don't think that it should be like a long journey, you know?
I think that it can be quite difficult for things like numbers to come up organically, though. I think there's a place for like being taught them
Sure.
explicitly somehow. For example, if I recall, you used to have issues with
I still do.
some of the Spanish numbers.
I
The
still do.
the
I don't It doesn't get in the way.
I'm trying to think. I've forgotten the difference between cardinal and ordinal. I think it's the ordinal numbers that you were struggling with, like 12th,
You know
13th,
what? My Spanish
those in Spanish,
teacher,
right?
my italki teacher from Mexico doesn't even know all the ordinal numbers. She told me that like it hardly ever comes up. They hardly ever use it apparently. So I don't feel so bad about that. But yeah, the ordinal numbers, things like that. But I think you should investigate those things when you care about it. So if you get to a point and you're like, "Oh man, I don't know my numbers. I should look into that." If you're interested in it, suddenly follow that interest. But in the beginning, like forcing yourself to learn numbers and colors and fruit and food names, I don't know. For me, some people might really like that stuff, but for me, I wanted to get into stories like Ola Lola for me would have been really great. I didn't discover that till later, but the story is really compelling, it's funny, it's interesting, and it doesn't try to like teach you what most people think you need to know in the beginning. And I think that's the trap of a lot of um beginner content.
Also, if you're super deep in believing the whole input hypothesis, you can't
Hmm.
really choose what you learn anyways. It's just what your brain decides to take in.
That's right. You just got to let it flow over you and whatever whatever sticks sticks.
Yep.
And what's going to stick is what you find, like you said, compelling. So, compelling domain?
I don't know.
Uh,
So numbers are tricky. Like some languages use multiple sets of numbers, or they treat ordinals very differently from the cardinal numbers. Like in Filipino, there are three sets of numbers used: English, Spanish, and the native
3?
numbers. Yeah, and they're used for different things.
Oh my gosh.
So, like you can say doce isa. So doce is obviously Spanish, means 12, and then isa would be one. So what you're
I'm pretty
literally
proud of
saying is
myself.
12 one, and that's something like it costs 12 pesos for one of the items. So
Oh.
and Japanese does this too. They've got their own native numeral system, and then the Chinese numbers they borrowed.
Hmm.
So numbers can be tricky. I think some things are just really hard to get from immersion alone. That's my hot take.
Wow, that's a spicy take, Gorg. Spicy take. No, I'd
I also
agree.
agree.
I'd agree. But the cool thing is, this is stuff that you're gonna use, right? Ye A lot, most of what you need, you're gonna find in immersion. But filling in the gaps with numbers is not really a hard thing to do. It's just you take a day, you learn your numbers. It's pretty straightforward, you know. But I mean, depending on what language you're learning, unless there's like 17 number systems. How many number systems are in Japanese? Cheeky.
If you're just like counting, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's kind of easy
Right. But
because,
with
like,
Japanese, you've got like Mika or whatever for
oh yeah,
3
you have
days,
all the
right?
counter words. Oh my god, that's a different topic. Counter
But
words in
but
Japanese.
but like mitsu is not related to san, right? Like it's a totally different
Hmm.
word for the number 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I definitely think some things are just hard to learn from immersion. It's worth sitting down and just kind of like grinding them out in your SRS of choice.
Yeah. I think numbers are probably something you can grind. I don't know. I'm not an expert on number learning, obviously.
Do you think
But
there's
yeah.
such a thing as a bad domain?
Mm, Probably the ones that I like the most would be considered bad domains, like science fiction. I think my domains are bad, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, but sci-fi, probably not useful in the slightest. Um, Maybe poetry wouldn't be useful either because nobody talks like that in real life. Like, imagine if your domain was just, I just like reading poetry. That's like all I do. Well, that's kind of like music, right?
Yeah.
Like, if all you did was listen to music lyrics
Yeah.
and you just repeated song lyrics, like that wouldn't be useful.
I don't think there's a bad domain necessarily. It's about timing and when you choose to go into the different domains. You can have
That's a
bad
good take.
timing, but not a bad domain, I think.
So
So
bad timing,
someone
not
in
a bad
the
domain.
live audience said that classic literature might be a bad domain, and I'm actually tempted to agree. I think that classic literature is not a great domain to start out with.
I think
or at
that's
any
right.
point really. I consider myself pretty okay in Filipino, but when I read stuff from like the 1600s, it's sort of like pulling teeth. There's just a whole bunch of old
Yeah.
vocab, old inflections that are not used, and it's not useful. It's not going to come up.
Yeah, remember that show? I'm gonna butcher it. It's in Japanese. Kotaru lives alone. I don't know what it is in Japanese, but the little boy, all he
He's
watches
like a
is like
samurai.
old timey samurai show, and so he talks like a samurai because that's all he watches, and everyone's like, he talk.
And
It's
how did they
so
handle
weird.
that, by the way, in Spanish? Because like in Japanese, they just
I think it was like just
literally
like a
talk
lot of
like a samurai.
usted. It was just very formal, like usted, you know.
Yeah, I
Um,
watched I watched it in Japanese, and he was definitely like "Ohayo de aru," and quite literally trying to sound like a samurai. I'm curious how they translated that to other languages,
yeah.
localized it, if you would.
I'm trying to like imagine if someone like only learned English by reading Shakespeare or reading Jane Austen and things like that.
That would be
That would
hilarious.
sound I mean, honestly, I would think they probably would sound pretty smart. I would be very impressed. But also part of me would be like, what century are you from? Like, what is going on here? Because you're not gonna learn in reading classic literature. It's great because if you want to talk about things that are culturally relevant, a lot of cultural things are built upon, like the classics and things like that. But as far as how people talk, it's definitely not useful for conversation unless you want to sound like an old-timey person, and that's fine if that's your thing. If you want to sound old-timey, that's great, but yeah, I think I think that's probably right. Classic literature probably is not the best.
Yeah, well, I'm not into classic literature. I am definitely into web novels and light novels and pulp fiction.
There you go. You're getting all the best vocab. You're getting
Yeah,
all the slang
I'm
in there.
surprised at how easy some of the translated Spanish light novels are. I've got
Mm.
one that I'm working through on Link, and it Link tells me it's got about 5,000 unique words in the whole light novel. I'm like, wow, that's about the level of speech. So yeah, I really like the pulp fiction, the light novels, the web novels, but it might just be because it's easy. We're kind of going back to like ease of comprehension is directly related to how much I enjoy it. Other people may be different.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I just tend to find things that I like that are comprehensible, but it's in the genres that I like. But I am trying to branch out into more useful stuff. So we talked a lot about slice of life, how that is a very functional domain, how romance is very functional domain, travel is hotly contested. Korg is anti-travel, while Shiki and I are on team travel. Shiki, are we on team travel together?
Yes, we are on team
Okay.
travel.
Team travel. We are on team travel. There's another genre, and I don't even know if this could be considered a genre, but like the self-betterment stuff out there.
Hmm.
Um,
Self-help, like,
not
uh,
self-help necessarily,
I I know
but
what you're
personal
talking about, things like
development.
Atomic Habits,
Atomic habit, yes. Business
yeah, okay.
books, things like that that, help you actually be a better person. So, do y'all think that those, first of all, are those things that you're interested in reading slash listening to? And second of all, how useful do you think that stuff is aside from it being useful because it helps you to learn how to focus better or do more, but do you think that the vocabulary itself is useful?
Oh, interestingly, I actually earlier this week put 3 of those self-development books, as we're calling them, on my
Ooh.
reading list. So I'm not sure yet. I worked through part of Atomic Habits a few months ago for like book club, but in general, I don't seek out that type of literature and I don't read it. So I actually
I
can't talk much about it other than I will know in a few weeks
Yeah,
after I
I
actually
don't
start to
either.
read the books that I have.
Yeah, I don't either, but I part of me thinks that it would be good if you want to like have like a deeper conversation with a native level speaker in your target language. Aside from the surface stuff, if you want to talk about stuff that's really important to you, I think that branching out into stuff like that will give you really good vocabulary to talk about things, beyond the surface level.
Yeah, I think this kind of comes back to what I was saying about it's about timing. I feel like that kind of domain or genre would be useful for somebody like you're saying who is a high level learner already and they're trying to expand and have deeper conversations. But I think it wouldn't be so great for a beginner because I my feeling is that that kind of domain uses a lot of like esoteric language, if that's the right term, like kind of intangible stuff, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. Yeah. So what do you think would be the ideal? So if we were to like boil it down and say, okay, you're like Shiki, you are highly motivated by efficiency, right? What domains, what order of domains do you think would be like the best order? And we don't have like, by the way, for people listening, we're not like the authority on this, but it's an interesting question. What do y'all think is the most efficient domain progression, if you will?
Do you
So
wanna
I'll
go
take a crack at
first?
this one. Yeah. I definitely think not beginner content, learner oriented content, like graded readers, comprehensible input. I think that they do very well. And the studies I've seen back this up that people who do graded content tend to outperform their peers. But again, their peers are not like immersing, right? So again, it's not the best analog for like refold and refolding. But I would definitely start with graded content, learner directed content, and then work my way up through slice of life and slice of life adjacent sort of domains. Um, I wouldn't jump right into something super difficult, but difficult is subjective. Like being a chronic dabbler, something like in Dutch, very simple things jump out at you. The cat sat on the mat. De kat zat op de mat. Sorry about the pronunciation, but it's the same. Whereas Spanish, that would be totally incomprehensible if you had never studied Spanish before. So, like, when I first started refolding Spanish, like last year, I was able to read a technical book that used a lot of the shared Latinate vocabulary while I was still not able to read a novel. And you might find that what language you're learning and where the domains are shared between the languages depends sort of like where you want to start. I think that somebody with a decent education who knows a lot of Latin, Greco-Roman words could jump into a technical thing in Spanish or French a lot sooner than they could a novel.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Uh, to add on to that, I think that, once you get to that point where you're more comfortable with, just basic life stuff, probably choosing the domains centered around things that you personally like to talk about with your friends. So if you're someone who's really into, I don't know, uh anime, just as an example, find people who talk about that specifically. Or if you're someone who's really political, find channels that talk about things that you like about that. Or if you're really into sports, some people really love talking about sports. I'm not one of them. Sports ball, yeah. But if you're into
Sports ball.
sports, yeah, sports ball, find sports podcasts or things of that nature. I think that finding, or if cooking, like there's so many things out there. I would say narrow in on, first of all, what are you most likely to use? Which, like you said, like slice of life stuff, interpersonal relationships. That's really good. But then once you get from that, I think that probably the most efficient way to go through it would be to gravitate on the things that you like to talk about.
I think it's really going to depend on the person. Like, whenever
Exactly.
someone is new, um, I feel like every language learning newbie is going to fall into one of two categories. They're either motivated by understanding, so they would want to go into the comprehensible input, the content for kids, the content for learners, things like that. And then you have the second group of people who are motivated by just keeping their interest. Like, they don't care how hard something is, but they just want to have an interest in it, and that's gonna keep them immersing. So, I think you have to kinda consider the type of person you're talking about because, like, for me, personally, I'm the type of person who tried the whole graded content, beginner content, learner content thing, and I was like, "Wow, this is boring. I'm gonna go watch anime." So, you really have to consider the type of person.
I think that your story is not unique in that. I think a lot of people nope out of graded content, especially if all you can find is stuff that's really dry and really boring. So when you first started watching anime, let's say that, there are people like you that, they want to do stuff that's more comprehensible, but they're having a hard time with it. What are some strategies that you did when you were watching, your slice of life content in the beginning to make it more comprehensible when maybe it was more advanced
Well,
than
that's the
your actual
thing.
level?
Even in the beginning, even the slice of life content made me nope out. And I went and watched an anime that was super nostalgic for me as a tween and a teenager. So I already knew the plot like front to back. So it was super easy to just start watching that. And the anime, by the way, is called Yu Yu Hakusho for any fans out there. Um,
What's the English name for it?
I
Is
enjoyed
do
it. That's the
eh,
English name.
What is
you
it?
could call it like
Ghost
spirit
detective,
detective
maybe?
or yeah, or
Yeah.
ghost detective or something like that. Uh,
That
but
sounds like
yeah.
something I'd like.
Yeah, basically the main
I
character dies
definitely
in the
saw
first
it
episode.
growing up.
I didn't watch anime growing up. I
What?
discovered that. Yeah, I know. That's a whole nother podcast. That's like a whole conversation.
Yeah, so Yu Yu Hakusho just basically carried me from stage 1 to stage 2A,
Eh,
basically.
I kind of did the same thing in Spanish where in the beginning I watched like the very 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 beginning. I watched Pokemon because it had matching subs and dubs in Spanish on Netflix. And it was really easy to follow along and look up words. I already knew what was going on because I watched it growing up as a kid, and it was really highly enjoyable, even though, a lot of the vocabulary has nothing to do with anything in real life. Um, Learning the basics, planting that like seed of comprehension. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head of finding something that you're familiar with and that you like. So then when did you make the jump from content that you were familiar with to slice of life? Because it sounds like you had to force yourself, right? So you made a conscious decision to do slice of life. What was your progression into that and how did you make that enjoyable?
Yeah, so I was just kind of sticking with what would work, like, the same kind of mindset, like, "I like Yu Yu Hakusho, so I'm going to rewatch that." So it was just, like, stuff that I knew I enjoyed from the past, or stuff that I could make a reasonable prediction that I would enjoy, but it was, like, new content to me. So, throughout stage 1, 2A, 2B, I just watched stuff that I already knew that I would enjoy or that I could predict that I would enjoy based on my interests. And then getting to stage 2C is when I made the decision to focus on slice of life because that's what the roadmap suggests is picking something that you will focus on for 2C to get to level 5 comprehension and get
Mm,
to outputting. And
nice.
it
So
was
this
kind
is
of easy.
probably not a problem that a lot of people will run into, especially people like learning Spanish or Japanese or any of the European languages. They actually have a lot of translated content that we would be familiar with. But like for some people, like they might be learning, I don't know, Thai or Filipino, there's not a lot of content that is in both languages. You don't have that ability to like jump in and say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to reread my favorite novel in this language," because they just don't have it. So I feel like that's a little bit of a privilege for people learning these bigger, sort of richer languages with the
I would
money and
agree with that.
the literary culture behind them.
So what would you recommend? Because you've learned Filipino. What would you recommend for people that are learning a language like that to
Oh,
do
I'm gonna sound like a
again.
broken record. I think that amateur fiction is really easy to get into. I would start there. And I'm a big fan of chat fiction, where it's sort of like fiction told through the perspective of like a group chat and like WhatsApp. I feel like it's at the same level you would expect TV to be at. Um, and I feel like because it's amateur, it tends not to be so great in terms of like breadth and depth of vocabulary, maybe.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. I think you brought up chat fiction before, and I think that's an
Yeah.
excellent thing to focus on because especially if you want to like have a conversation with somebody, in your target language, most people start off doing that not with voice but via text. So learning like those like text speak or whatever, I think is great. That's awesome. And it's more simple too. It's easier to look up. I'm guessing I've never read it, but I'm guessing that um like the snippets are shorter. Like would you say that like each like bubble of dialogue is shorter than reading like a paragraph of text, or do they tend to be pretty verbose?
I don't feel like they're very verbose. Overall, the stories are a little bit longer than a short story, but they tend to not be like fully fleshed out novels. But as far as like the paragraphs, I feel like it's like what you would expect on a Discord chat.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that sounds awesome. Kind of like reading
Yeah,
like
and
a webtoon but without the visuals.
we actually did not touch on webtoons and comics as sort of like a domain
I
within a
love
domain,
webtoons and
right?
comics.
Like
They're so
you
good.
can have slice of life comics, which is the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, do you think that comics are a medium or are they a domain?
I would say that they are a medium and not a domain.
I agree with that because you can have so many different domains within comics. Like you can
But
have
I
the regular superhero comic, or you can have like a gritty urban fantasy thriller type thing.
but I would say like as far as like the we were talking about like w- where you should like the ideal path, right, of choosing your domains. I think that web comics and manga and things like that are amazing for people who haven't gotten their feet wet reading yet because the language is simpler. It's more like chatting, not necessarily chatting, but it's conversational where people are talking and there's not a lot of descriptive vocabulary. The description is covered by the images themselves. So you're getting a huge amount of context on every single page from the visuals alone. And I think that it makes it a lot easier to read, but I don't think it's its own domain. I think it's a medium, like you said. I know, I say manga. I listen, I grew up saying like that. Don't at me in the comments. I know I say it weird.
I don't feel like manga is any closer to how actually it sounds in Japanese, but that's like the whole Anki versus Anki debate.
Yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
it's just like you grew up
So
everyone
saying it
bully
one way.
Briz. Bully Briz.
No, don't bully me. Whatever. Bully me in the comments. Whatever. I can take it. I'll cry a little bit, but it's fine.
Just a
I think
little.
I say manga actually.
You say
So
Meg? Maybe it's a South thing. Like that's just what I grew up calling it in school, and that's what I grew up hearing it as. I know this is a side conversation, but I'm just defending my honor.
Dishonor.
No, don't dishonor me. How do you say it?
Which one?
I'm scared to say it.
how do you say manga?
How do you
Manga.
say manga? M- Among Us. That's what it
Okay,
sounds
and
like.
how about anime? How do you say anime?
Oh,
Anime.
well, anime, because it's like an English word at this point.
Gotcha. Interesting. All right.
That was a really
So
spicy
we
take we all
are.
had.
It was a spicy take. Guys, we are coming to the end of the Refold Roundtable podcast. Thank you all for coming to the live recording of the podcast. It will be out on YouTube and Spotify in the next few days, so keep your eyes peeled and drop a like to help the algorithm.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Refold Podcast. We hope you enjoyed listening and maybe even learned something new. Projects, events, and content like this podcast are only possible thanks to our generous patrons. If you liked this and want to see more similar projects, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Visit community.refold.la/patreon-benefits to learn more.